So we're now starting the third part of this course, and what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about two more forms of industrial structures, oligopolies and monopolies, and then we're going to talk about how firms that have some pricing power, how they price things. And then we're going to conclude this course with a chapter on information theory. That would be things like insurance, buying used goods, how basically the consumer makes actual decisions with limited information. And then we're going to conclude this course with a final chapter that talks about the role of the government. And I'll make an extended discussion of Social Security as well. And a little bit about what's called public finance or public choice theory. Okay. So, in this chapter, this would be chapter 13. In chapter 13, what we're going to be talking about here are oligopolies. Now, you actually would encounter oligopolies quite often. Oligopolies are a structure where there are few sellers, generally between 5 to 8. There are many buyers. And what's key to the oligopoly being able to exist is that there are significant entry-exit restrictions. Now, the question becomes one of how do these entry-exit restrictions exist? What form do they take? Well, the form that they take is one either of name recognition. For instance, the automobile industry is a perfect example of an oligopoly. And as an oligopoly, a car is a significant purchase. $20,000, $30,000. You're not going to buy your car from, a car company called, if I start my own, called Tom's Car Company, because you're not going to spend $20,000 or $30,000 on a guy who, in this case, actually knows nothing about cars to construct one. Right? You would trust names that have a reputation: Honda, Toyota, Ford, Chevy. Given the cost involved, you would only trust that. Also, things like airlines, right? You would trust an American or a United versus Tom's Plane Company. A significant one is actually, though, the cost structure. For something like the cell phone industry, which is, again, another perfect example of an oligopoly. For cell phones, for mobile phones, you have to put towers everywhere, you have to do billing, you have to have a distribution network to sell the phones. That's incredibly costly. Right? The most costly part is actually setting up the network, not delivering the service. And then sometimes these restrictions take the form of patents or other government licenses. So it's the presence of these entry-exit restrictions that allow there to be only a few sellers that are also able to capture significant profits. Now, when we talk about examples of, we've talked about two already, of types of firms that look like oligopolies. We said certainly the car industry, the airline industry is another good example. But I would like to talk just a little bit more about mobile phones, because that's something that's been in the news here, especially right now, about the proposed merger between AT&T and T-Mobile. So, right, what's the proposal is the following: is that AT&T, if we, actually, let me say this. So, when economists are trying to see whether an industry is actually an oligopoly or not, what they do is they calculate something known as the four-firm concentration ratio. And what that four-firm concentration ratio tells us is, if we look at the top 4 firms in the industry, how much of the market share have they captured? It's amazing. And I actually just looked this up very briefly. In the car industry, the top 4 firms and all their subsidiaries. So like obviously General Motors has like Buick, but they also have Chevy, they have GMC. So looking at General Motors, Ford, I think it's Toyota and Honda. Those four companies have 87.3% of the market. It's amazing, right? I mean, 9 out of 10 cars are produced by those four firms. Breakfast cereal, 78.4%. Almost 8 out of 10 boxes of cereal have been produced by one of the top four firms. Computers, 50%. 1 in 2 computers are made by the top four firms. Your Hewlett-Packards, your Dells, what else would they be? Your Gateways, maybe? I'm not even sure. So in trying to, I would add to that, and I wasn't able to find the stat on it, the cell phone industry. Top four firms: Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. If you think about the number of people that have something other than that, it's pretty small. I mean, obviously in this area, US Cellular is popular as an alternative. I've got Boost Mobile, which is actually part of the Sprint company. But I mean, when we think about the cell phone industry, those top four firms have pretty much most of the market. And so the government was very reluctant, and in fact stands quite opposed to AT&T taking over T-Mobile, because it's going to make an already anti-competitive industry even less competitive, right? I mean, imagine if there were only 3 firms, especially T-Mobile, which is known more for having lower prices, right? That would mean that AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint now have the whole market. And Sprint's not doing that well, so if Sprint were to fail, then you would have just AT&T and Verizon. And you can already kind of see this then idea that if you don't like Verizon, go to AT&T. If you don't like either, what are you going to do, right? You could use a US Cellular, but it doesn't work for everyone. Now, it's not necessarily the case that it's not necessarily a bad thing that in the cereal industry the four-firm concentration ratio is nearly 80%, because there's lots of alternatives, right? I mean, Kellogg's and General Mills and Post and whatever the fourth one is, they can't just charge whatever they want, right? Because maybe I'll start eating waffles, right? Or make eggs, or I'll get that cereal that's in the bag, like at the bottom of the aisle. Like there are lots of alternatives I could use. But when we're talking about something like automobiles, perhaps it's a bit more concerning, right? Because there really aren't that many substitutes for the industry. What we also have to look at, though, too, is does it work to the benefit of consumers? In the cell phone industry, it's been decided that it pretty much would not be. It would mean higher prices, perhaps lower quality. But the only reason why AT&T now works so hard to provide customers, consistent service, is that there are 3 other firms that consumers could go to. Would AT&T work that hard if it ends up that only Verizon exists? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. So the whole reason why I just want to talk a bit more about this four-firm concentration ratio is that oligopolies are not always a bad thing. In the airline industry, fares are pretty competitive, and fares, in fact, have fallen year over year since the industry was deregulated in 1978. So consumers have actually benefited from the oligopoly structure, and there's very strong competition among the airlines. But again, it all depends on what the substitutes are, what the cost structure is in the industry. Now, the big question here for the oligopoly is how does it determine its prices? I'm going to pick up on that topic in part 2 of this video.